Welcome to the Interrupted Podcast. I'm your host and founder, Steve Hallman. It's good to be with you again this week as we are setting ourselves up for another powerful conversation here on the Interrupted Podcast. Whether you're finding us for the first time or you're tuning in once again for another episode, another conversation, I do thank you for taking the time to support the show. And more importantly, I do trust that you're getting some powerful tools to be able to attack life and deal with all the life-shaking interruptions that come our way each and every day. There's no way to get away from them, but having the correct mindset, the correct perspective, educating ourselves, preparing for what's ahead, even the unknown, is an important step in getting through challenges and difficult times and help us celebrate the many wins and opportunities that are out there for each and every one of us. And so that is my desire and always top priority as I set up these conversations, these interviews with high-performing people that have overcome quite a bit. I am extremely excited to share with you our conversation today. But before we get into that, I just want to take a moment and remind you to head on over to our landing page, interruptme.org, where you can find everything you need about the Interrupted Podcast and the Interrupted Outdoors. There is a lot going on in both veins right now. I have a couple good Interrupted Outdoors shows that are going to be coming your way as we're getting close to hunting season. So all of you that have been tuning in and are excited for those next shows, you're going to want to definitely stand by here for the fall and some things we have coming down the pike. So with that, let's just get into this show. I'm excited to bring on retired Chief Tony Pustizzi. He was the police chief in Coral Springs, Florida. He is a retired chief. He was in law enforcement for over 30 years. And man, a ton of experiences that he's going to share about everything from working in the homicide unit to being on the SWAT teams. And then in 2012, when he became the chief of Coral Springs. And where you may have heard his name before is during that unfortunate incident on February 14th of 2018, the Parkland shooting down at Majority Stoneman Douglas High School, and where 17 innocent people lost their lives and another 17 were injured. And it was obviously all over the media for a number of different reasons. But as always, I think it's something that law enforcement does just an incredible job with, of trying to learn from tragedies and acts of evil. And by no stretch of imagination, this was a great act of evil by the shooter that day. And Chief Pistizzi was kind enough to sit down. He displayed just an incredible amount of courage as he shared this story, which he has done several times for the purpose of educating and learning from these experiences. So I'm going to let him tell you all about some of the things that he's accomplished over his career. But this is such a timely episode as all of us parents are getting ready to send our children back into schools as we're emerging from a lot of the COVID lockdowns. I know there's a lot unknown yet about what's ahead for this school year, but one of the top things that is on all of the administrators and teachers and parents' minds is where everyone is with mental health and what should we expect going back into these schools. And Chief Pistizzi gives us a very candid look and helps us ask some really important questions. And at the end of the interview, he's going to talk directly to all of you parents out there about maybe some key things to talk to your kids about and maybe some things to be asking the teachers and administrators as it comes to school safety. So the safety of our children is a top priority all across the board. No matter if you're in a private school, public school, in an elementary school, or you're at one of the largest colleges in the nation. So it is an important topic that we're going to absolutely dive into, and I'm incredibly grateful for this man and the time that he was able to spend with me on this call to teach you. Be sure to check out the show notes where his full bio is going to be on there if you want to know more, and also check out his company 4-Star Strategies if you're interested in further training or you want to just learn more information. Everything will be synced up there in the show notes, so definitely go over there on whatever platform you're listening or viewing this podcast on. So without further ado, I'm pleased to bring you this conversation with retired Chief Tony Pustizzi. Tony, thank you for sitting down with us today on the Interrupted Podcast. I appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been ever since a while back. I got to meet one of your colleagues, Nate McVicker, there with Here 911. He's like, man, you have got to sit down with Tony and hear all the good work that he's doing, and just from his experiences. And I'm so glad it worked out, even though we had a bit of back and forth. Sometimes that's the nature of it as we try and align our schedules. But man, just reading over your bio and hearing a little bit about just from a distance of what you've been involved in with your career, both proactively and then like we know with a lot of law enforcement, there's just part of the nature of business where we're called into situations that just have to be handled and dealt with, and then we have to debrief them, and there's so many lessons that can be extracted. So I'm really thankful for this conversation today. I believe the audience is going to get a lot of value out of it.
I hope so.
So absolutely. Well, before we talk a lot about really kind of what I'd say is the bulk of what I know about you, I'd like to kind of just set a little context and hear a little bit about, maybe if you could let us know just where you grew up and what probably maybe prompted you to look into law enforcement as a career. That seems to be a hot topic right now, as so many agencies are trying to dissect and understand in the current generation what actually causes someone want to step into a profession that is just constantly under attack, both internally and externally, in many ways.
Well, I grew up in South Florida. I was born in Miami. And I always wanted to be a police officer. My grandfather was a police officer, and my uncle was a police officer. And actually, back when I got into it, I graduated the University of Florida and became a police officer right after I had my degree. And I remember my uncle and my grandfather both saying to me, "Don't do this job. You know, it's changed so much over the years." This is 1986, 87, 88, somewhere in there. And
Okay.
They were really like trying to have me do something else. And but I was committed. It was my passion ever since I was a young child. I always wanted to be a police officer, so I thought it was a very rewarding and noble profession, and it still is. But fast forward all these years later, I did 30 years on the job, and I have two sons that are police officers now. And one's about 6 years, and one's about 3. And I found myself telling them the exact same thing: go be a fireman. You know, everybody loves firemen. It's just that the last 5 years or so in law enforcement has gotten very difficult, and I think the tide will change. But I think right now you're seeing, if you're a police officer now and you remain a police officer, you want to be a police officer. It's in your heart. You know, it's that it's what you want to be. Period. So
yeah. No, absolutely. What were your views, or what did you think? Like, now you had the exposure through family, but what were your early goals coming into the profession? Did you have certain units or things that just kind of really captivated you as a young patrolman?
Yes, actually, kind of ironic because I ended up being a police chief, but I really got into it. I wanted to be on SWAT. I love tactical. Spent actually almost 16 years on the SWAT team. Rose up the ranks through that. Was the commander for a while, but and investigations. I really enjoyed being a detective sergeant. I worked homicide, sex crimes, child abuse. So I really that honestly was really my path. It just turned out that I'm a big believer in timing is everything, and promotions came available. I put in for them. I always say I'm fortunate. I was lucky that I was able to get promoted along the way. And but I think that drive really helped me, because again, if you would have asked anybody when I first got in law enforcement, if I was going to be a chief, I would say, oh, hell no, I don't want to sit behind a desk, you know? So
Yeah.
it's just strange how your career works sometimes.
Well, what even in the later years leading up to getting into a chief position, obviously, I'm assuming, and maybe that's dangerous to do, but there's a lot of leadership opportunities that come up in law enforcement, whether you're a general supervisor, whether you're handling admin, whether you're dealing with civilians. There's a lot of. Is there a particular situation or rank that really stands out to you, that you really became aware of some of the skill sets that you were building, that ultimately led you to a place where to lead a department? And I realize that's an ever evolving position and changing and the knowledge that you need. But is there a time and place or even a particular supervisor of yours that stood out where it said, hey, these are the characteristics and the traits that I want to exhibit as I lead men and women that are serving their community?
I wouldn't say there was a particular rank. I think there was a period in time when I became a captain, and I was very fortunate at the time, just the way things worked at the department. I ended up staying in the detective bureau. So
Okay.
now I controlled everything in the detective bureau, um, all the units and everything else. And that was my forte. That was what I really enjoyed doing. So when I was told I was going to stay in there when I got promoted, I think that really excited me, but it also put me around the people that I really was working with. And as I was more of a decision maker now, being part of the command staff, I think they saw I was able to get our voice across a little bit more. I was a little more heard because I was in the rooms now.
Mm.
And I think, that kind of started making me feel like, okay, at least I have a say, somewhat of a say. Not that I'm a decision maker, so to speak, but I have a say and what happens with the department and stuff. So I would say that's probably when. As far as when I was chief, I would tell you I was deputy chief about 6 years, I think. Probably like the last 2 years I was deputy chief. I kind of thought, I could be the chief. I like to run things my way, and it just worked out. But yeah, timing's everything. I really believe in that. And
Yeah.
but there's not one incident that I guess I just screw it through the department. That's what happened.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, what fascinated me so much about your story, as Nate was sharing some things with me, and obviously what we're going to get into is something that just dominated and still continues to make headlines nationwide. While the individual incident is important to learn from, I think it my hope is it leads to a greater conversation of both men and women, sworn and civilians, to continue a conversation about generally situational awareness and understanding that evil does exist in this world, and that even sitting down and watching or listening to a conversation such as this can stand to inform and prepare us in a way. While it's never going to be the end, it is definitely part of the process. And I know in my background of getting the opportunity to train civilians in situational awareness, as we highlight incidents that occur throughout this nation and throughout this world, they often, I think, captivate us at first, and then we need to sit back and realize, I think, the weight of them. So, before we talk about the specific incident down in Parkland, what is there something that stands out as you go around and speak to civilians and sworn officers about emergency preparedness? A general theme, and there's so many people doing it now. Some are doing it well, some are not. But is there something that sticks out that we can maybe set foundation for those that are going to listen to this conversation, and something you would really like people that you speak to extract from your experiences before we get into it?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty simple in my mind. It's, good leaders will never say it'll never happen here. And I still, even to this day, find a lot of leaders in positions that still echo those words. And it's truly amazing to me. So they don't prepare. I could tell you the city of Parkland, I worked in the city of Coral Springs, just south of it. It's a little small city in Broward County, Florida. Safest city, it was in the same year, this shooting happened on February 18th. On February 14th of 2018. On February 12th of 2018, they were voted the 15th safest city in the country. Just a few days before.
Wow.
Very, very nice community, no crime, all that stuff. So I try to tell people, people get locked into, if I don't live in a really big city or in an area that, has a big population, I won't be a victim. This can happen anywhere. Actually, most school shootings, which we're going to talk about, happen in areas outside of a big city. So I would say it's just that we still find people burying their head in the sand, thinking that this is not going to happen in their community.
Yeah. And I even know now, as I keep in contact with some of the educators I used to work with, I was a second grade teacher actually before I jumped in to what I'm doing now. So I often remember this time of year, specifically August, as we think about going back to school and living in this pandemic era that we're in, and apprehension, and kids are going to be coming back. What have kids dealt with? I know thinking about school violence and school shootings, and definitely has a place in educators' minds. While it doesn't dominate, teachers are still looking forward to their kids coming back. But it's a place that we do need to pause and understand: are we prepared in that moment to move forward? So, would you, as you get into this, would you take us back to that day and February 14th, and give us some perspective of what that day was like, and just the general response, if you can kind of set the scene as we hopefully get into some lessons and some ways that we can be thinking about just being out in the community.
Yeah. So when you look back in 2018, there have been some school shootings. Sandy Hook, of course, everybody goes back to Columbine, but for actual public schools and that type of situation, that had been a while since Sandy Hook, and I think we let our guard down, similar to what we're doing now. I think everybody that's in my area of expertise will tell you, unfortunately, and we all hope we're wrong, but we're going to see an increase in school violence this coming school year. And I'm really concerned about the cities or the school administrations that have not taken this seriously because of defunding or whatever other rhetoric is out there about removing SROs. That's a tough spot. I get very, very heated over that because we're failing for the avoidable. We can fix some of this, but looking back on February 14th, Valentine's Day, it was happened to be Ash Wednesday, beautiful day down in South Florida, 2:00, 2:22. Our dispatch lines blow up that there's a shooting happening at Stoneman Douglas, which is literally right across the street from a major highway that separates the two cities. As calls started going in, we were forwarding those calls to the Broward County Sheriff's Office, who actually patrols that city. Once we were made aware, and there was a time delay in that, once we were made aware of the shooting, we responded. So it was pretty surreal. It's one of those things I'll tell you, I don't remember how I got there. I don't remember how fast I was going. Really didn't care. But when you hear that and you think, the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, there's a school shooting. Well, I can tell you just another statistic, not that I'm a statistics guy, but before February 14th of 2018, there are already 18 school shootings in this country. Nobody realizes this. They happen a lot, but it's a student against a student against a teacher, something like that. It's not a mass shooting. So when the calls started coming in, you can hear the radio traffic and the dispatchers, the way they were talking. You can hear this was going to be a bigger event. So as I'm responding to that, I'm trying to put all pieces together on what we can do to help, and then to get to the bad guy as fast as we can. But at the time, we don't even know if it's one bad guy, four bad guys. We don't know.
Yeah. What were you expecting as you were doing some just mental simulation and arriving? What were you expecting your role was going to be based on what had been dispatched already?
Well, since we were a little delayed and we were actually responding as an assistant another jurisdiction, we, like I said, the sheriff's office is the primary responsibility to police that area. So on the way, I was fortunate enough. This was a Wednesday at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We had a lot of staff that day. All the command staff was in. So as we were responding, and in my head, I was trying to think of, okay, what can we do to help the sheriff's office? What can we do to get there and locate the guy as fast as we can as a city police department. When I got there, I reverted, and this is one of the lessons learned I tell people, I reverted back into SWAT commander mode. I exited my car and I was charging towards that building because I was like, okay, I got to get in there. I got to help stop this threat. And it was one of my captains that actually grabbed me and said, hey, we really need some leadership here. Doesn't look like the sheriff's office has got anything going on. And my team and I set up a command post, which is very hard. I tell people all the time, for me to sit in a command post doing something like this is not what I envisioned my career to be. I had 3 weeks left on the job. I had a scheduled retirement after 30 years. I left on March 2nd. It can happen at any time, anywhere.
Yeah. That's that statement in and of itself is a valuable lesson to anyone on the job. And you hear quite often men and women late in their careers where that became a defining moment for them in time over the course of a long career. Why you need to stay ever vigilant in those moments.
I've been involved in a lot in my career. I always look back, some very scary moments, some very tragic moments, some things that, I tell officers all the time, PTSD is real. Don't make light of it. I think we learned that, a lot of our guys really learned that in Parkland, because you cannot unlabel what you see. And I think looking back, even though as prepared as I thought our team was, I still think it was really tough to get through, to see that kind of carnage, that kind of death. And like you said earlier, just a very vicious individual that was intent on killing people.
Yeah. And having a mindset walking into an event, there's obviously way more training that is occurring now, but at that time for you and your department, what type of training had you implemented for active killer situations at that time? Had you done any multi-jurisdictional work with Broward County, or what kind of training were you all sitting under in preparing for any event?
Well, because I was involved with SWAT for so long, we definitely did interagency training for years. We trained regularly with the SWAT teams throughout the county. I think there were 13 at the time. So, from my perspective, that was always in my mind. So when I became chief, the two chiefs before me felt the same way. While they weren't tactical guys like I was, they had always offered me the space to operate and kind of allowed me to have my vision on what I felt was best for our officers to have. And the equipment, the knowledge, the training. So when I became chief in 05, no, I'm sorry, in 12, I apologize. In 2012, I took that to the next level, and I really kept pushing that training. So I believe our department was trained up for this incident. I believe that they acted extremely well, extremely professional, extremely tactical.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about SWAT people. I'm talking about just the average police officer on the road.
Yeah.
Because of the training that we instilled in them for years, really paid off.
Yeah. What was the response from your department in the assist role? How many officers were involved in arriving on scene in that initial wave?
The initial wave, we probably had, I would say, I think we counted about 110.
Wow. Okay.
That were there. We are the closest city. There was one other city, Coconut Creek, it's close as well. They had a good complement there, but we're the biggest city in that particular region. So we were able to get a lot of staff there, and obviously it was all hands on deck. Once we heard that this is actually an active shooter, it wasn't like you had to ask to go. You had to go right across the street. So, mm-hmm. So we had a lot of manpower, but we also had a lot of supervisors, and which helped us. We were able to start coordinating efforts because the city of Parkland is more of a wealthy city, and really no crime. They didn't have many officers or deputies. They didn't have many supervisors working, and to come from headquarters was a good 30-minute drive. So,
wow. Okay.
We ended up, taking on a lot of that responsibility for the first hour. Just trying to help out. I do want to say, with the Borough Sheriff's Office is a great agency. I don't want, you should never judge the actions of a few. We hear that all the time, right? When it comes to cops.
Yes, sir.
Judging out other people. But in this particular case, I do want to be on the record that, prior to this, we had a great relationship with our sheriff's office. This one kind of went sideways a little bit.
Yeah, no, as they do sometimes for a number of factors. There's a lot that goes into that when you're dealing with human beings and decision making, and that's that obviously is a different conversation. But what I'm very curious, and this is even really on a personal level in some spot, as you're arriving on scene and you have a lot of people coming, you constantly hear in preparations for these, look, the cavalry's coming to when that call goes out, and you start to arrive on scene, manage. Was there a driving force when you all arrived? Were shots being fired when you got on scene? Or at what place in the minutes? Because we know these things normally don't last very long in terms of that driving force. It's everything after that has to be dealt with. What did you immediately meet with and have to manage once you kind of took that moment of detachment and said, okay, I need to provide leadership? What was actually happening? Was it chaos? Was it much slower than what people think? Or
yeah, it was much slower. Actually, ironically, and of course, we didn't know this at the time. This is investigative work afterwards. As our first officer got to the scene, the sheriff's office had a number of deputies there. But as our first officer arrived, he was actually heading north on the east side of the building. And as Murphy's Law would have it, coming south on the west side of the building was the shooter who had just left the building 12 and was fleeing. When you look at the timestamps and you look at the cameras, it's just amazing. Unfortunately, that I wish he would have fled south on the west side, on the east side of the school, because our guy would have grabbed him right there because we were with the one witness that knew who he was. But of course, that didn't happen. So because we knew that there were no shots being fired, because our officer was telling us it was eerie quiet, he called. Just because at that point everybody was locked down, everybody was trying not to cry, they were trying not to scream because they didn't know where the shooter was. So the first thing you have to do, and I was fortunate because my entire command staff was there, we were able to start divvying up. This is a big school. We were able to start divvying up assignments and try and direct guys to different buildings because it's 13 buildings. This is only one building. At this point, we have no idea who the shooter is, how many shooters there are, or where they are. So you have a 45-acre campus, 13 buildings. It takes a lot of organization, and that's what our team was doing while we had a contingent in Building 12, rescuing people and actually looking for the killer in that building. We had to remain cognizant of the fact that he could be out, and he was, but the radio traffic kept going back and forth. Assume he's not in the building anymore. Assume that he's on campus. So yeah, we had to set up a perimeter and start getting assets in place. And I go around the country, and there's some places that I go, it's going to be hard for me to put 50 guys together in a crisis like this. It's very scary. I can tell you we had over 700 state, local, and federal officers there within 2 hours. It just kept coming and coming. But, in that area of the country, in Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County, there's over 6 million people. It's a lot of police officers. So we were able to lock down a 2-mile square perimeter, and that's where he was caught as he was trying to flee. But I recognize that's a luxury of manpower.
Absolutely. What were some of the comms issues that you all had to work through, or was that something that because of so many officers in that area, were you all on the same radio system, or did you have to go through dispatch centers to be able to communicate?
Yeah, so you got to step back in time a little bit to understand it. It's a little long story. I'm trying to make it as short as I can, but
yeah,
for years, everybody had their own systems in Broward County. Okay. And at some point, maybe 4 or 5 years before this incident happened, the discussion on regionalization came up, and regionalization moved forward. And there was a number of cities, police departments and fire departments that agreed to link up to the regionalization model, which is under control of the county. At the time, I just looked at it from the chief's, deputy chief's perspective. I said I was right at the balance there when I became chief, as it was more important for me to have what I consider to be probably a B+ center, if not an A center, at the time. And I knew that going over to a big organization like that, you're going to lose the homegrown, where your dispatchers know the city, they know the officers, they're familiar with the landmark. You're not going to get that on a big county system. The main driver, though, was that the county system at the time was over 25 years old, and it was antiquated, and it was not performing. So when I became chief, our city commissioners and our mayor and the city manager was willing to believe in me, and we actually upgraded our system. So we had perfect comms. Our comms were great. Sheriff's office, about 15 minutes into this tragedy, they lost their comms. The whole radio system went down, which nobody was surprised about, because it happened about 16 months earlier at the Fort Lauderdale airport shooting.
Okay.
To this day, unfortunately, the comms are still not fixed because it costs a lot of money to do that, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
The point I want to make is, yes, that did cause a problem for the sheriff's office, but here's the thing. We are interoperable. We have interoperability with our comm centers. We created that. It's literally the flip of a switch on a console. What should have happened was when we called over to Broward County Dispatch and they started having issues with the radio, they should have been able to basically plug and play right into our system. Mm-hmm. And we should have been able to have them all come over to us, and we would have dispatched with them. But unfortunately, training, human failure, people get into this, and it's hard if you're not trained up. So that's really what happened. So yeah, the sheriff's office radios went down. While I would tell you that at the beginning it wasn't a problem, it became a problem because we were obviously getting more intel than they were. But one of the things is, we do in law enforcement, is you always post guys with another agency. So there's always that group of guys talking. But unfortunately, if I'm sitting with you on the corner of the building and you're hearing what's happening over my radio, you can't transmit it to anybody else because your radio's dead. So yes, it was a hindrance in some regards, but as far as our attack on the building, it didn't affect us at all.
Now, did you guys have TAC medics involved? What was the integration like of Fireboard, EMS, setting up casualty collection points, all of those, necessary and really task-heavy steps were, and I guess I'm thinking more in terms of just incident command, of a chain of command, egos, making sure that the boots on the ground are getting what they need. I mean, these things are massive, and I mean, you clearly even more massive in scope than what I first I think thought until you said the amount of law enforcement that were there that quickly. I mean, you can create problems for yourself that weren't even problems 10 minutes earlier.
Yeah. So to answer your first question, yes, we had the ability. We've been working active killer training for years. Okay, single plus multi-officer response.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was around 2016, maybe we started working a rescue task force with that. And what rescue task force means is our paramedics, our SWAT medics, general medics will come into a warm spot with us. Actually, and I would tell you, after what I saw the bravery of those men and women that day, they're going to go into a hot zone because they followed us in. Our SWAT team, we have a big SWAT team, full complement of negotiators and everything else. But we also had 8 tactical medics on that team.
Wow. Okay.
And every time we put in for an opening, we probably get 16, 20 paramedics wanting to get on a team. So it's always been a very good, close bond with our fire department. So on this particular day, yeah, we went in and we started triaging all of our guys. Also carry beacon kits, stop the bleed kits on their uniforms. We did that, years earlier, and we were able to use those tourniquets and quick locks to start triaging some of the kids, and then get them to the paramedics, which were right behind us, and then evac as we're going through this building. I remember there's no shots being fired. It's very quiet. So we know with the muzzle discipline and everything else that we're controlling the hallway, and we can backfill. We can get people out because we have all the confidence in the paramedics. That all the confidence. If anybody came out, the amount of muzzle force that we had was going to take care of that issue. So yeah, that's how we ended up starting to use rescue task force training. I believe in it. It worked. It saved 17 lives, according to the medical staff.
Wow.
17 students survived because of the treatment that were given by the paramedics and the cops in that building, and then the speed at which we got them out.
Mm-hmm. What surprised you in those first that first hour, the first 2 hours, in terms of, I mean, you drill and you drill and you train and people come up with new best practice, but when you're there and you're actually executing, was there anything that surprised you that it's like I have to dynamically work through this because there was not an SOP for what we were trying to do?
Well, there were a couple things, and probably the two that stand out the most was there were some failures with the leadership of the sheriff's office and the officers that were there, and that delayed their response into the building. So we basically responded, and I have no problem saying this because this is the truth. We ended up responding as the primary agency in that building. We went through the perimeter and went in, our guys, to control that building, along with some SWAT and other members from the sheriff's office. But so that was a little bit hard to work through because it's not our jurisdiction. And, we're basically just doing what we feel we need to do in somebody else's jurisdiction. So that was a little unusual. And the other thing that was unusual, we always plan for bad intel, but to make matters worse, we were given intel at the time from inside the school, from one of the assistant principals, that the shooter was coming back down the stairs from the 3rd floor.
Huh.
And, that held us up. It held us up too long. But in reality, he was gone 26 minutes before that intel, which we were being told. I actually asked myself, is this happening now? Yes. Turns out the gentleman, he went in and started looking at footage. And what do you do when we're looking at it now? There's nothing to see. You roll it back. And somehow between the rollback, that never got communicated to radio transmissions, even though we were asking. But the second or third party that was advising us it's real were obviously incorrect. And we didn't know that. So we had a delay. Thankfully, I say this because, when you have to stand in front of parents and talk to them about their children that died, it really wasn't much we can do with the victims on the third floor, because that's what slowed us down a little bit. The 223 round is a very powerful round. It's very hard to survive on some of those rounds. So we were so fortunate that we saved 17. It could have been 34 dead in this. And I'm not a medical professional. I'm just telling you what's out there. You can see it on the internet. They came out and said, you guys saved 17.
Yeah, no, and that's huge. And as you look at that, obviously, in after action, that can go to inform a lot of training and just decision making of sworn officers going in and having to triage very quickly, relying on. And I'm curious, as we're talking about the medical side of things, my assessment of a lot of situations, whether it's a school involved or just general injuries that I witness, the more people that can understand how to control trauma through one, major bleeding, stopping that, just entrance exit wounds, how to deal with those immediate, very life-threatening injuries can go a long way. I would love to see that schools would go to start training kids how to use tourniquets in gym class or health class, and basic. I'm gonna say what we now call basic first aid. It wasn't considered that back then, but what we now know, how lives can be saved for that. I can only imagine the amount of tourniquets and life-saving efforts that were implemented by your men and women and the paramedics there that just can testify again to the importance of having that base level of knowledge.
And, when we actually started equipping ourselves with that, it was because we had an officer that was shot, and he was saved because one of our SWAT members at the time responded as a backup, and he actually used what we used in SWAT. So, but it worked so well, everybody felt, we should all have this. So it worked out great, even though, no officer was hurt that day, but all of our equipment was used to save lives, obviously along with the fire department. So, but it just comes to willingness to believe it's going to happen. I travel all over the country, and I talk to school districts that, I talk about having a stop the bleed kit in each classroom, about $50 on average. They don't want to spend the money. And I tell them, if you're locked in a classroom for 2 hours and you have a student that is bleeding, they're going to bleed out if somebody's not going to help. And then I'm told, well, yeah, but you can't. Our teachers aren't going to do that. Well, you know what? That's true. That is, some teachers won't. That is true. However, especially in the middle of high schools, I would argue there's probably a kid in each one of those classrooms that wants to be in law enforcement, wants to be in the fire department, wants to be a medical person, wants to go to medical school, wants to go in the army. Somebody is going to take a bandage or a quick lot or a tourniquet and use it to save another child's life. And I'm appalled after seeing what happened in Parkland, the fact that we have superintendents and educators that just are not willing to spend the money.
Yeah, no, that is a huge point that constantly needs to be reiterated. That there's an expense, and in some cases, expense can be preventing you from doing things because how much things cost. But we're talking very affordable devices when we're talking about budgets. And I realize there's some level of simplicity. I'm making it be that there's other factors. But when it comes down to saving lives, I mean, men and women are capable of stepping up, and the prepared person may choose not to engage, and then you may have someone that you would never expect that would possibly engage and
You're a
save
school
someone's
board,
life.
you're a superintendent. Your job, your first number one priority is the safety of your students and your educators. That's it. Then, secondly, obviously, is making sure they get a great education and all that comes along with that. But if you can't ensure the safety of your children when their parent lets them off, to go to school, what kind of a learning environment are you in where you're constantly worried? Our kids understand what shots sound like now. When this happened and they started hearing the shots, everybody knew. Isn't that sad? It's a sad statement to make, but our 14-year-old kids that were in that classroom, in that building, knew what they were up against. And equally as appalling to me is the fact of, and I hope we get into this, but the removal of SROs.
Yes.
I just am flabbergasted, is the best word I can use, that any politician, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, but for you to actually sit there and support the removal of SROs, the whole idea, and if I can get off on a tangent for a second.
No, let's talk about it, because it is a major question that parents are raising.
Well, and they should. And they should. They absolutely should. And I would tell them, I'm sorry. I feel bad for you if your SROs are taken out because kids are going to pay a price. But you look in this country, the school resource officers, okay, they're like when I was in homicide, my team had the best homicide training in the world. I mean, we spent the money and time. SROs, good SRO programs are the same way. These guys are constantly, men and women are constantly going for additional training to understand mediation, understand what to do in a school when you have maybe a special education kid or something, how to understand who those are and actually work as a partner with the administration.
Mm-hmm.
That's not happening. And you're seeing areas where you have the schoolhouse, the jailhouse pipeline. And there are, I totally admit that.
Mm-hmm.
That has to be addressed by the chief and has to be addressed by the principals in those particular schools because something is not being done right. The worst thing we can do right now, knowing that a lot of these individuals that have some issues have been sitting at home for the last year, isolated and doing their research, we are taking the one person that can possibly stop a school shooting out of the schools. It's preposterous. Now, I would say, yes, did the SRO at Stoneman Douglas do the job he was supposed to do? I don't think so. I think he could have made a difference. But you can't look at one actor, and say that takes away everything else. This school shooting, everybody in this school, 34 people were shot in less than 5 minutes. There's departments in this country, and people have to understand this. It's going to take 15 minutes to get to the school. Sandy Hook was blessed. They happen to have guys close by, but when you take the SROs out, there is nobody going to get there that fast. And so it's truly amazing to me that we're allowing this to happen. It's also amazing to me, but I think everybody's seeing it now with defunding the police and listening to people that really do not have an idea of what really happens and what needs to happen to control the country. We're going back. I mean, I started my career in 1988. We're going back to crime patterns that were back in the 90s that were terrible.
Yeah.
Law enforcement's done a great job. Could they do a better job? Of course. But getting back to schools, it's that really scares me because we made our schools fortresses now too. Single point entries. Everything's locked. Well, how fast do you think a police officer is going to be able to get to the school he has no knowledge about? And he or she's going to have to figure out where the shooting is, what building is what. It's just time is not on their side.
Yeah, no, and consistently, I think a lot of our superintendents and just our central offices have to realize that, yes, by acknowledging that evil may come to your doorstep is something that is an okay realization to have and an okay thing to mitigate against. Where a lot of times I find more people are like, I don't want to do that preparation, because that is admitting to your point right when we started that, oh, that this could happen here.
Right.
And we like to, put up the shield and say, this is the safest school ever. And if we put those mitigation factors in place, then, oh, that means maybe my student body has issues that are outside of my control. Well, let's face it, you're talking the human element. There's always things outside of your control.
Yeah.
And to put confidence in parents' minds that, hey, when my child goes there, they're having the best opportunity to be safe and learn the most, has got to be a priority. And I think the conversations like we're having are the ones from men and women that are the boots on the grounds and that are tactically having to look at it, need to happen more, because it's an education piece too, that falls on our hands.
Well, if you and there's not a lot of chiefs, or sheriffs out there that have gone through something like this. But I can tell you, I spent my career in homicide and everything else in SWAT. I've seen a lot of death, unfortunately, needless death. Okay. But even somebody like me, it's astonishing when it's so many at once, and it's difficult when you're, if you've never had to do this, if you're a politician that's never had to do it, I pray you don't never have to, or a chief or a sheriff. If you've never been in a room with parents of murdered children and trying to talk to them and explain why this happened. Why is my daughter not coming home? I just dropped her off to go to school. In this country, because I deal with some of the parents in this country, they talk about all the time. Listen, 9/11 happens. What do? We stand up TSA. Now you have all these screening. You can't really get on the plane, right? But we've had since 2000, 250 students and staff members die in schools. 250. How is that acceptable in this nation? Our schools should be the most protected buildings there are, because, God forbid, if I'm a terrorist, that's making a statement. It really is.
Yeah. No, our soft targets. And it's that constant struggle between, safety and freedom. And those are conversations that need to happen. But we need to be making sure best practice is being applied to people like yourself that have lived through these moments. And could you talk a little bit more about the parents that day and how you were managing just expectations of parents and reunification, and that, from the trainings that I've sat through, seems to be one of the largest issues outside of the general stopping the threat, is just dealing with the community in a sensitive way, but in a way that has a high level of accountability.
Yeah, and when I say we, I remember this. There were a lot of agencies at play here at that point when reunification started. Could we have done a better job? Yes. Were we prepared for that kind of? I mean, there was 3,200 students in school that day. That's a lot of students. And we already know between evacuating 19, 20 out of the school. Some of them didn't make it, but you can't necessarily identify. Kids for the most part in the country don't wear lanyards identifying who they are. A lot of times the children had to be identified. It took a while. It was an active crime scene because the suspect was not dead. And all you can do is try and put people in, but it's hard to say, if the shooting happens at 2:30 in the afternoon, by midnight, if you have in 2018, if you haven't heard from your child, it's probably not good news.
Yeah.
Because we have enough information on the 17 or 20 that were at the hospitals. The medical staff is very good at that. They're very, they're excellent when it comes to notifying and make sure they identify. But when you have young, people inside a building that you've got to meticulously identify, you can't make a bad identification. You just don't do that. So it took the teams, the medical, the CSI teams and stuff. And remember, the FBI was here, and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. There was a lot of people, and they were going as fast as they can, but they can't afford to make that mistake. So what do you do at 12 o'clock when, we can't really tell you that your loved one is still in that building, but if you're not hearing from them, look, I have 3 kids. I mean, my kids are grown up now, but I would be going nuts. I'd be
Yeah.
out of my mind. And I totally understand it, but I wish we could have done that better as a group, a whole group with the Bureau and everybody else, but we're still refining that. I don't think anybody, now there's some programs out there and there's some reunification software that definitely helps out. But I just say, when you have 3,200 children, it's hard, to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. There's two, through our conversation and rethinking through some of the topics we discussed, there's two groups that, because of your experience, if you would speak to for a minute. The first being the parents. As we approach 2021, 2022 school year, what conversations and questions do our parents need to be asking their children in preparation and their school? If you could talk to that parent that's like, man, I want to be prepared, but I don't know where to start. This is overwhelming. I don't want to think about it. It's scary. But what do I need to talk to my kids about? And what do I need to be asking of my administrators and my teachers?
I think the first one with the children's is a little harder to answer because depending on the age, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when you saw what happened at Sandy Hook, I mean, they're little babies. I mean, they're 5-year-olds and stuff. I mean, they really can't do anything for themselves. But when you start getting up in the middle school and high school, what I told my kids was, look, I can't be there. We'll get there as fast as we can, but you got to block the doors. You have to do whatever you can to not be seen and secure yourself, because today, in today's world, it's head counts. They're going in. If they have 300 rounds of ammunition, they want to kill 300 people. They're not going in and spraying. They're trying to actually kill people. So you have to tell your kids to hide as best you can. Be quiet. If you can run, you got to run. But when you run, go get help, or at least tell a police officer what you're hearing or seeing once you get out, if you're fortunate. But if you're stuck in the classroom, you got to band together, and you got to try to block stuff where they can't get to you. And as far as the parents, I cannot stress to them enough that, look, politics has got to be out of this. I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent. I don't care who you are. But the parents need to take a stance here that if you're going to ensure your child is safe in your school district, you need to be going to the board meetings, the school board meetings, getting with the principal, getting with the superintendent, and saying, listen, no, we want our officers in the schools. We don't want officers making arrests as they have to. We all believe that. Diversion is a beautiful thing when it's done correctly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they need to be fighting, because law enforcement saying it. Unfortunately, right now, nobody's listening to us. But if the parents start, you never live through this. This is a very bad experience. So you got to make your push before something happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked a little bit earlier. It's like, even get yourself a little bit of training. My 6-year-old takes a tourniquet and a chest seal and an Israeli bandage to school in her backpack every day. Could she do it perfectly? No. Yeah. Does she know what it is and know what its intent is? Could she ask for help if need be? Could she provide that piece of medical equipment to someone else? She absolutely can do that. And the more, I don't care, you go to formal training or you get on the internet and start training yourself and listening to people that know what they're doing around these life-saving tools. Take some initiative in that.
Well, and I think that's amazing. You're doing it for your daughter when she's that young. Some people would hear that and say, "Oh, okay, he's overthinking it." But you know what? You talk to those parents at Sandy Hook. You talk to the 14-year-olds that died in this shooting. Stop the bleed. tourniquets would help. And maybe we could have saved more lives, but I do believe there would have been somebody in that classroom to try, as opposed to watching somebody bleed out.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Well, what about our sworn professionals out there, our chiefs, our sheriffs, and then our men and women that are, working patrol every day that are going to respond to these things? From what you saw, and what would you recommend? I'm sure it's a long list, but if there's some things that stand out, or maybe some encouragement into training or whatever that thoughts for them.
It's a tough time. We started this off with me telling you about my grandfather, my uncle telling me I was crazy to get in this line of work, and me saying the same thing to my sons. So, I think people in this country, the vast majority of the silent majority, will eventually stand up and say enough when it comes to crime fighting. Murders are out of control right now. I hate to say it, but the people leading the charge right now are leading us in the wrong direction because of that. There's going to be a backstop to that. There's going to be a correction. There has to be, because we want law and order in this country. Yeah. So I tell them, when it comes to being a police officer, you have to continue to do your job. You swore an oath. If you're given the amount of training that you should have been given by your departments, you have to believe in your skills and what you've been trained. That's why we spend all this money on training. When it comes to schools, I tell the SROs, give it a year or two, they'll be filing you back into schools. Because once, unfortunately, as I hate to say this, but as we lose more kids, educators are going to be forced by parents to say, no, I want a cop in my school. Let's make sure we doesn't arrest everybody, but I want a cop there, because that's who's going to maybe make this stop. Because the one thing I want to tell you too was, before I have one more comment on the question you just asked me, but what you don't hear about, and really is tough that we don't hear about it, is how many school shootings are prevented every day in this country.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Stations with the SROs. I don't even have a number for you. I can tell you it happens every day. I don't have that particular number. I wish the ICP or somebody would get that number. But they're all documented because we arrest the kids. But I could tell you, in my city, we had 3 or 4 shootings that were gone on campus with somebody ready to do something, that somebody talked to the SRO and said, hey, this guy has a gun. Now, with the SRO not there, you don't have the familiarity with an officer. Well, it's gonna get worse. But anyway, getting back to your question, I try to tell officers, look, you have to be straight. You have to keep moving. You have to remember why you got in the job. It's not to be appreciated. It isn't. Nobody appreciates you when you give them a ticket, but you're doing what you were born to do. And then I tell police, the chiefs and the sheriffs that they, I'm sorry, I know I'm retired, but I got 2 kids on a job that, I care about. They gotta do what's right, and they have to get in front of their commissions and their elected officials and start making people understand you're buying into a false narrative. It's a false narrative.
Yeah.
And something has to change, or there's going to be a lot of people dying needlessly, which is terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. The consequence is so great for inaction or delayed action, which I feel like, we have meetings upon meetings and committees upon committees that sit and want to go back and forth about it, but we need to put into place some actionable steps that everyone that's responding to these has exactly what they need to do the job. Is it going to always end up perfectly? Is every life always going to be saved? It's like we have to be realistic, but that is the goal. That is the driving force always. And hard questions being asked afterwards are important. What kind of my final thing is, I want to respect your time, and what did the officers experience in those early moments of, obviously highly trained men and women go out and they do their job well, but I can only imagine a leadership role. What were you encouraging your supervisors and other people to be looking for? Are there any things that stood out? When we talk about resilience, obviously people fall on all ends of the spectrum. Some people deal with it well, some people don't. But were there things as you were trying to care for people under your leadership that you were looking out for and trying to help in?
I have to tell you, I can't say I'm blessed enough. Not only did I have a great command staff, but I had great line supervisors and I had great officers. Um, they were on cruise control. They didn't need me to tell them anything. They didn't need our command staff to tell them anything. The command staff were more based on logistics and making sure we got extra help to them. But I couldn't be more proud of what I saw in the videos afterwards on how we went in and what we did, because they were on cruise control. They were acting like any chief would be blessed to see their members act like. So, we just need to stay out of their way. You say it all the time. Let the guys do their jobs, and they did. There were some frustrations because of the issues with the deputies versus the cops, and that was probably the worst part of it. Was dealing with that aftermath because there was a lot of unhappy people, and that was very, very tough. But I'd probably say the only other thing I can say out of that was that there's always going to be that moment in time where even the most seasoned officer, paramedic, or whatever else are going to realize what they're looking at is an actually deceased child, and it does get you. You'll never forget that moment because it's not an actor, it's real.
Yeah. And it's tied to real emotion.
Yeah.
Were there your guys that were there? Was there immediate? Obviously, there was a lot of fallout from the response of the one deputy, and that kind of blew up in the media. Were some of those situations about the response of officers, was that immediately apparent, or for those of you that were there, or was that something that came later in debriefings and as the story unfolded that you guys had to deal with as incident command?
Yeah, no, we had to deal with it when it was happening.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that was very. It took a lot of effort to separate and to kind of tell everybody just wait. Let it all come out in the wash, so to speak. I felt bad a little bit for the sheriff and the sheriff's office because I don't think the communication that they got from their frontline supervisors was accurate. And, the sheriff obviously took a hit on that, but, we knew at the time that they were going to have some issues and, it's unfortunate. I wish we would have had more conversations with them, but we kind of went our separate ways after that night. So, and I had to do what I had to do was dealing with my guys. That my concern was only about my staff and making sure that they were okay and, getting them, to talk to people and work through what they saw. It was something we dealt with that evening.
Wow. Yeah. And those kind of things just come up and are unplanned for, and you got to dynamically deal with them. So, well, as we wrap up here, would you talk a little bit about what you're doing now in terms of getting this word out and the good work that you're doing and opportunities available for people to hear some of your training, where you speak, and just connecting with what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, I retired. I was scheduled retirement on March 2nd. It was 3 weeks after this. My command staff was there. I had two deputy chiefs. One of those chiefs, deputies became chief. So it was easy turnover of power, so to speak, or you say.
Yeah.
But we all did it together. So those guys have been dealing with this aftermath for 3 years now. I retired for about a year because that's maybe a little less than a year. That's because that's what I really wanted to do. I was happily retired, but I was asked to come in as a special counsel to the new sheriff of Broward County that was installed by the governor. So I did that for a few months, and then I was asked to start speaking on this topic. And at first I was hesitant, but I did one or two, and I was told I did a pretty good job, and I started getting my message out, and I feel that people are listening. So that's what I've been doing. I've taught all over the country. I was to teach in Canada later on this year. I teach at Quantico, the National FBI Academy, and I've taught for um, school administrator associations. So I'm doing
Yeah.
everything I can to get the word out. And what I really talk about, I just want to leave you with this, is the reason why I'm doing this is there were 3 adults in that building that died trying to save those kids. And you would never, Mr. Beagle was on the 3rd floor and holding open the door for his students to get into. And unfortunately, he died doing that. You had Coach Hickson that ran into the gunfire, former military guy that tries to advance on the suspect. Unfortunately, he gets shot and killed. And then Coach Feist that comes in, again, tries to get in the building and unfortunately gets shot as he's entering the building. So here's 3 men that nobody ever hears about. And that's, to me, when I look at the faces of the 14 children, of course, but you never hear about those men that really went above and beyond and lost their lives trying to save these kids. And they were wrong, but they do what they could do. And so that's my passion. That's why I hope to do it as long as I can. Because you never hear those names if I wasn't telling you them.
Yeah, no, right on. I appreciate you taking that time to bring them up, and really important to remember the true heroes of all these just horrible acts of evil as they unfold. Man, so can schools, districts, how do people reach out to you, and are you through what you do available if districts are trying to bring somebody in, you or other organizations?
Yes, I have my own company now. It's called 4 Star Strategies.
Okay.
FOUR Strategies, starstrategies.com. And basically, I have my resume and everything else that I do, who I speak with and everything else. They can contact me through that. Or my cell phone. I give it out, 954-868-4894. I'm always willing to go. And any place I haven't been, especially, it's a big state, a big country. So,
Yes, sir.
and
Yeah.
I do work, you mentioned Nate before. I do work with him, trying to get schools to install these buttons. And it's all about time. The seconds are not our thing. Time is on our side. Every second matters. And the faster we can get notified, the faster we can get badges there. He has a program called Hero 911 that alerts any officer in the local area to a panic button alert at their school or their building. So, we're trying all these different angles. There's so many other vendors and so many other from glass companies and door stop companies. Everybody's trying, but you can only do so much if suspects from within.
And you got to be doing something. I think that's what is so appalling to me is when you see schools or businesses, churches that are choosing to do nothing because there are opportunities to take action. Well, sir, I appreciate you, one, having the courage to just tell your story and share. I realize there's ongoing still investigations and things happening around this topic, but for the authenticity that you presented today, I appreciate it, and I know so many parents out there and people that are in the communities are going to appreciate it. So it's great work. I'll be sure to link up all of your information right in the show notes that people can check out over on YouTube or wherever they're getting their podcasts. So definitely look forward to seeing and hearing more from you, and hopefully get a chance to maybe hear you in person sometime and some more opportunities there. So I can't thank you enough.
I appreciate it. I hope to see you at one of those trainings. And if I could just leave you one last thing, we're all
Absolutely.
parents and we're all Americans. It doesn't matter what anything more than that. We're American parents that have to protect our children in every way possible. And that's what government's role is, to make sure they're protected. So we just got to focus on that.
Yeah. Well said. And that's a great place to end. So thank you, sir. And there you have it. There is our conversation with the chief. And man, what a incredible amount of information that this man brings to the table, as I'm sure you have just heard. I appreciate you tuning in. I hope you were able to jot down some notes, maybe some questions or some things that you were thinking about. If you have questions for me after hearing this episode, please don't hesitate. Shoot those right off to me at steve@interruptme.org. I'd be happy to answer your questions around on some of these topics and definitely direct you over to the chief. And be sure to send him an email at tonyp@fourstarstrategies.com. That's all one word, fourstarstrategies.com, and check out the notes so you can take a little bit deeper dive into what he is doing. So be on the lookout for new shows dropping soon. I appreciate you taking the time and allowing me to interrupt your day.